So recently I was watching television, a rare moment, and this guy was telling his TV wife that nothing was going to happen to their TV baby. And he didn't look very convincing. You know, either wasn't a very good actor or he just didn't believe what he was saying. And it actually was an ad for life insurance. And it really struck me that he didn't look like he believed what he was saying. And basically, you know, it doesn't make sense, like, because if nothing was going to happen to them, then they would have just been this static image, you know, rather than a moving projection of something that had happened in the past that I was now watching. So it just didn't make sense at all. So, you know, the truth is that something happens to us every moment of every day. And I heard recently, actually at Buddhafield, that in fact, from the moment we're born, we're old enough to die. So from the moment we're born, we're old enough to die. So those insurance companies, obviously, they feed off our fear that something's going to happen to us, actually. But change is actually who we are, and we needn't be afraid of it, actually. So if we can embrace change, you know, it can lead to liberation. Liberation from the illusion that we actually have any control over life from one minute to the next. So this afternoon I just want to talk about how by embracing change we can deeply recognise that we're all in this together, and that by realising that we can connect with a genuine care for one another and for all that lives. I actually heard during a performance at Padma Pancakes the other night that we're all born, we all suffer, and none of us are going to get out of this alive. So I thought that was a great connecting statement, actually. I liked it. So I actually didn't want to be born. The story goes that I was 3 weeks late, that my mother was in labour for 3 days, and the doctor eventually dragged me out, kicking and screaming. I had long hair, long fingernails. I was clearly happy in the womb, and I didn't want to be born. And before my first birthday, I'd actually tried to kill myself. I'd taken poison, and I had to have my stomach pumped. I nearly died. So, and as I started to get more of a sense of the world, I became even less enthusiastic about it, actually. My family, we were the only family in the street that would have regular visits from the police. You know, so violence would erupt in my family often. My mother often started it, but she always came out worse off. And I hid in my room a lot. So I was the one at school who could do better, and basically I wasn't very enthusiastic at all about life. I wasn't interested in school, you know, I had no outside interests. And I grew up with a very uninformed and even sort of cynical view of the world. So once I left home, I decided to try and exploit it, but that backfired. It felt like the world was exploiting me. And fortunately, basically I just kept putting myself in dangerous positions over and over again. And I gained nothing. In fact, I lost a lot, including my self-esteem and so on. And fortunately, in my late 20s, before I'd actually completely destroyed myself, I realised that it was drugs and alcohol that were destroying me. I turned to drugs and alcohol as a way of coping. And so I got sober, and in my 30s, I started looking for the meaning of life. I wanted to know why we existed in this crazy world. What was the purpose of it? It seemed so paradoxical to me. On the one hand, there'd be sort of hatred and violence and, you know, people taking advantage of one another, and then on the other hand, there'd be kindness and love and generosity, and none of it made sense to me. And so I started on my spiritual journey, and I practiced yoga, and I read inspirational books, and I had my palm read, and I went to spiritual groups and had my astrology chart done several times. But no matter where I looked, I couldn't find any answers. And in my early 40s, life had actually taken a turn for the worse again. And I was completely and utterly and deeply depressed. And so I knew I was suffering, that was clear. But now my quest became more along the lines of what's the point of this, In fact, I had this theme song. Most of you probably won't have heard of Peggy Lee, but she sang a song, "Is that all there is, my friends? Then let's keep dancing," So I just felt, again, very cynical. And anyway, on one of my many visits to my astrologer, she told me that I would meet this spiritual group that was based in Friendship, and lo and behold, 4 months later I came across the Friends of the Western Buddhist Order, and that's now Triratna, the order that I now belong to. And although I enjoyed the friendship, she said it was going to be based in friendship, and although I enjoyed the friendship, what struck me most at the time was the clarity of teaching. And I very early on, I wanted to know about Buddhism. I wanted to find out if the answers were in Buddhism. So one night I asked this order member to explain Buddhism to me in a nutshell, and he did. In about 20 minutes, he had convinced me that I was on the right track. Basically, he told me about the Four Noble Truths. So the first one, that there is suffering. Well, I knew that already. That was nothing new. But then he told me that there was a cause of suffering, and that there was an end to suffering, and that there was a way to the end of suffering. And I was interested. By this point, I felt like, my ears had pricked up. He had my attention. And I also heard that night about the 3 root poisons of greed, hatred and delusion, and the truth of impermanence, insubstantiality and no fixed self. And the way I understood that was that where I was in that given moment, and even today, that where I am is a result of my actions, and whether that is actions of body, speech or mind. So whether I'm thinking, speaking or acting. And that when I act, think or speak from greed, hatred or delusion, that has consequences. And, I was actually ready to hear that. That night I learnt that everything arises and falls according to conditions, and therefore, because of that, it's possible to cultivate wholesome conditions and to remove unhelpful ones. And I thought it was a really practical approach, and that worked for me. And there was a lot more to it that night, but what really struck me that night was that everything is impermanent, and therefore that meant I could change, and that was like huge. I wasn't stuck with me. I was convinced that night that nothing about me was fixed. I didn't have any permanent faults or failings, and I wasn't damaged goods. And that was huge. So, everything's changing all the time. In fact, everything's kind of dying in a way. But that's not all that's happening. It's true that nothing stays the same, but change means potential. It can mean potential. It can mean new life, opportunity for growth, a chance to develop, a chance to go beyond my ordinary self. And that ordinary self is the one that thinks about everything in relation to me. Why haven't I got that? Why have I got that? During the times that I've suffered the most, I've been thinking, that's not what I want, this is what I want. Why aren't I getting it? Like when I was drinking and drugging, if I was unhappy, I'd just get up and go somewhere else. I'd change my job, I'd change my friends, my partner, I'd move house. I've left whole households of things behind me when I've gone, thinking that I could avoid suffering just by leaving everything behind and starting again. Wrong. I took myself with me. And what I took was this living set of causes and conditions that just was rolling on. So basically, I just repeated the same mistakes. There's actually a saying, the definition of insanity is repeating the same mistakes and expecting different results. You know, that just doesn't work. So at the time, I thought I was just this kind of isolated, independent entity that could live more, be happier if I just removed the conditions that were around me. So I wasn't seeing the connection. Yeah? Anyway, I proved myself wrong several times. So that was where I'd got to. But as I said, I had come across the Buddha's teachings, and I had begun to connect the dots. So I could see that everything was impermanent and that we're all subject to causes and conditions and that nothing exists independently, but there was still something missing. There was some kind of disconnect that I hadn't really got, and I still wasn't happy. I was restless. I was still searching. I was still uncomfortable in my skin. And I went on this family retreat. I was asked to cook for this family retreat. I don't have kids, but I was asked to cook for them, quite a lot of them. And I did it because I love a challenge, and off I went. And I found out that the retreat was on loving kindness. And so I'm in the kitchen and I'm chopping away and heavily into impermanence, and I'm watching the veggies turn into different shapes, and then the smells are rising as they're cooking, and then the concoctions that are being made. And so I'm sort of right in there, just really enjoying the process. And I'm making kids' food like nachos and pizza and things like that. So it's good fun as well. And the kids have been only invited to practice random acts of loving kindness. And so all the while I'm being treated to offers of cups of tea, help, massages, lots of compliments, you know. And so there's this incredible atmosphere building. And what I noticed was that, you know, just as the food was transforming into these amazing creations, so were the kids transforming over this weekend, you know. And they were all becoming open and gentle and soft and generous. And but I could tell something else was happening. I was softening. I was opening. I was sort of feeling the love, really, and responding to it. And these people were being kind to me. I was giving them something. They were giving me something back, and I was happy. And something was happening. I was becoming happy. Whoa, new feeling. Anyway, I found myself sort of then questioning and exploring how through understanding and accepting impermanence we can experience interconnectedness. New idea. How through experiencing interconnectedness and really taking it on board, we can tap into this natural inclination of love or concern or care for all beings. Even newer idea. And I just digress slightly. This festival wouldn't be here if you think about it. What had to happen for this festival to be here? It's not just the people who put up the marquees and created all the banners and all that sort of stuff. What about the people who bought the marquees and stored them over the winter, and then the people who made the marquees and the people who made the fabric that made the marquees, and back it goes. And before if you reflect on that kind of thing, you start to realise that countless beings have actually created this festival. It's not just the ones that are here that we can see. It's almost infinite. So that's interesting, you know. Or reflect on the food that's here. You know, sure, these meals are being created. Well, who's cutting the vegetables? Who delivered the vegetables? Who grew the vegetables? And so on. It's just this amazing web of connection that we have all to one another. And, you know, what I'm talking about here, everything is a past event, but it's part of a present network of being that constantly contributes to our lives and experiences, even though we don't know who they are, and we never will. And actually this kind of reflection is really good for the metta bhavana practice, the development of loving kindness. You know, if you reflect on that kind of thing, it's very helpful in the third stage, the stage where we're thinking about people that we don't know very well, or the fifth stage where we're expanding out to all beings. You know, reflecting on this kind of thing can really help with that. There is actually a Buddhist image called Indra's net, which imagines the universe as a wondrous net of jewels in which each jewel reflects every other jewel in an infinite play of light. It's a really beautiful image. But we don't necessarily have to feel or to believe that, or to feel connected to all life. We just need to know that all beings are subject to conditions, and also that all beings suffer, as we do, as a result of greed, aversion and delusion, without exception. And if we really know this, we wouldn't invest and hold dear our sense of separateness. So knowing that there's even some truth to the interconnectedness of life, and really getting in touch with this, can lead to an empathy with all beings, an empathy with this planet and with this universe. And we can be more in touch with the need to care for one another and for this planet, not to add to the suffering of others, but to enhance the quality of life for all beings, even if it's just by being ethical and aware and not causing more damage than is unavoidable. So I'll just finish. This love and care for one another is based on the truth of impermanence and interconnectedness, and it leads to joy, because the very thing we run away from, which is impermanence, can lead us to the very thing we need in order to coexist in harmony, and that's love, metta, loving kindness. So the joy that arises from this vision is the joy of freedom. When we really know that nothing exists in isolation, then there's a natural tendency that arises. Instead of greed, we want to share and be generous. Instead of aversion, we want to care and love. Instead of ignorance, we want understanding and wisdom. And when we truly understand this, we loosen our grip on existence, because we know that it's never going to satisfy us in and of itself. And our hearts can turn towards the meaningful and to the joy and of boundless love. And I'll just finish with a poem by Pablo Neruda. To feel the love of people whom we love is a fire that feeds our life. But to feel the affection that comes from those we do not know is something greater, still greater and more beautiful. So even though I came into this world reluctantly, I'm glad I did, because I'm learning and I'm changing. I'm becoming, and I have the opportunity to become more and more of an individual connected to this web of existence in a way that contributes to the whole with love and understanding. I've got time for one more quote? Okay, Sharon Salzberg. With a clear intention and a willing spirit, sooner or later we experience the joy and freedom that arises when we recognise our common humanity with others and see that real love excludes no one. Thank you.